In the summer of 1970, the world seemed both restless and enchanted. The war in Vietnam raged on, Woodstock's echo still lingered in the air, and young couples everywhere dreamed of freedom, love, and new beginnings. Among them were two newlyweds, barely in their 20s, who decided that their first days as husband and wife should be spent at one of the most romantic destinations in North America, Niagara Falls. For decades, Niagara had carried the reputation of being a honeymoon capital, a place where the thunder of cascading water matched the intensity of young love. For this couple, whose names would soon be etched into the darker side of the fall's history, it seemed like the perfect choice. They arrived in late June, carrying only the essentials: a small suitcase, a camera to capture the milestones of their trip, and a sense of innocence that the world had not yet stripped away. Hotel clerks would later remember their laughter echoing through the lobby, the way they clutched hands as if afraid to let go, and how they asked about the best vantage points to see the water at sunset. To everyone they met, they were just another pair of dreamers caught in the timeless spell of Niagara's mist. But what no one could have predicted was that their honeymoon would never come to an end. Within days of their arrival, the couple would vanish without a trace, swallowed by a mystery as deep as the whirlpools that churn below the falls. The last photographs they took, later found in their abandoned room, captured fleeting moments of happiness. A picnic on the grassy banks near Horseshoe Falls, her hair whipped by the wind, his arm draped casually around her shoulders, their eyes glancing at each other with that unshakable belief in forever. The snapshots revealed nothing sinister, nothing out of place. Yet when examined years later, they became eerie relics, frozen moments before an inexplicable disappearance. It was a balmy evening when they were last seen alive. Some accounts place them walking hand in hand toward Goat Island, the narrow stretch of land that offers sweeping views of both the American and Canadian sides of the falls. Others suggest they were spotted near the observation tower, where tourists often gathered to marvel at the sheer force of the water crashing below. A few even claimed they saw the couple arguing quietly, though no one could agree on the details. What is certain is that after that evening, the young lovers were never seen again. When their absence was first noticed, it caused little alarm. Honeymooners often extended trips spontaneously, chasing the thrill of freedom and escape. But when hotel staff entered their room days later, they found all their belongings neatly arranged, clothes folded in the dresser, their camera on the nightstand, passports and wallets untouched. There were no signs of struggle, no hints of a hurried departure. It was as if they had stepped out for a walk and simply never returned. The families, heartbroken and confused, pleaded for answers. The police conducted searches along the banks, divers scoured the river, and helicopters scanned the whirlpools for any sign of bodies. But the falls are merciless. If the couple had slipped or been pulled into the current, the chances of recovery were slim. Still, something about the case refused to fit neatly into the box of tragedy. Why had they left everything behind? Why were there no screams, no reports of witnesses seeing them fall, no physical evidence at all? As weeks turned into months, rumors began to circulate. Some whispered that the couple had staged their disappearance, that perhaps they had debts or secrets that made vanishing into thin air seem like a daring solution. Others suggested foul play, that they had been lured away from the tourist paths and met a darker fate in the shadowy corners of the town. But the most haunting theory remained the simplest, that the falls had claimed them silently, without spectacle, without anyone to notice. The disappearance of these newlyweds soon made headlines across the country. Newspapers dubbed it the Niagara Mystery, and the story captured the collective imagination. For many, it wasn't just about two young lives cut short. It was about the unnerving realization that even in a place so public, so heavily visited, two people could simply cease to exist. Niagara, once a symbol of eternal love, now carried a ghostly shadow, a reminder that romance could dissolve into tragedy in an instant. Decades later, the story still lingers. Locals recall the case with a mixture of sorrow and superstition. Tour guides sometimes point to the mist rising from Horseshoe Falls and say the couple's spirits are still there, forever wandering in the spray. Visitors, especially newlyweds, feel a strange chill when told of the honeymooners who came seeking forever, and instead became a mystery without end. Their names are rarely spoken aloud, but their story has become inseparable from the mythology of the falls. And so, the legend begins with love, a love that was supposed to last a lifetime, but instead dissolved into silence. The honeymoon that never ended remains a haunting introduction to one of the most chilling, unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. What really happened on those misty nights of 1970? Was it an accident, a choice, or something much darker lurking in the shadows of the falls? The answers, like the waters of Niagara, continue to flow, rushing, relentless, but never fully revealing what they hide. Every disappearance has a moment, a precise instant, when everything changes. For the newlyweds at Niagara Falls in the summer of 1970, that moment remains both elusive and terrifying. It was the point where their laughter faded into silence, their presence dissolved into absence, and the story of their lives fractured into speculation. Witnesses, police reports, and whispered rumors have tried to pinpoint the exact vanishing point, but what remains is a blurred outline, an unsettling mystery where facts seem to evaporate like mist above the falls. The couple had last been seen near twilight, a time when the falls take on a haunting glow. The sky burns with hues of orange and purple, and the mist catches the fading light, creating the illusion of a shroud hovering over the river. It is a place where beauty and danger coexist, where tourists gasp in awe without fully understanding the violence of the currents beneath. Somewhere in that twilight, the newlyweds were observed one last time. Some say they were walking slowly toward Goat Island, as though savoring their final evening together. Others insist they saw them leaning against the railing near the brink of Horseshoe Falls, their silhouettes barely distinguishable in the dim light. But here the accounts fracture, for beyond this point, the couple simply ceased to exist. When authorities began piecing together the final hours, they faced contradictions at every turn. A local man swore he heard a cry carried by the wind, a sound unlike the usual shouts of tourists, yet no one else corroborated it. A woman claimed she saw a figure slip into the shadows near a wooded path, but could not say if it was male or female, or even if it was connected to the missing pair. Some tourists even suggested the couple had been seen boarding a bus late that night, though ticket records offered no support. Every detail became a fragment, and none fit neatly into the puzzle. The first chilling clue came when their hotel room was checked the next morning. Everything was in order, untouched, waiting for their return. Their camera, filled with rolls of undeveloped film, sat on the nightstand as though prepared for another day of sightseeing. Their clothes were still neatly packed, their passports and wallets undisturbed. It was a tableau of normalcy interrupted. Police officers later remarked how unsettling it was to step into a room that felt alive with anticipation but vacant of the people it belonged to. It was as if time had frozen the moment they walked out the door. Search efforts began immediately. The falls are a merciless place to hunt for answers. Its currents swirl with unpredictable fury, and its waters devour anything that slips too close. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning the white foam for bodies. Divers plunged into the rapids, though visibility was almost non-existent. Dogs were brought in to track scents along the riverbanks, but the trail always vanished near the edge. In every sense, the falls protected its secrets. Yet investigators could not ignore the unsettling absence of physical evidence. If the couple had fallen, where were the belongings they carried that night? Not a shoe, not a scrap of clothing, not a single trace surfaced. Bodies that slip into the Niagara River sometimes resurface downstream days later, but no such discovery came. It was as though the falls had swallowed them whole, leaving behind only questions. The official reports leaned toward accident, though even within the police force, doubts remained. Why would two young people, both described as cautious and reserved, venture so close to danger at night? Why were there no screams loud enough to pierce the roar of the water, no witnesses who could testify to seeing them go over? The lack of clarity transformed the case from a tragedy into a riddle, and then came the theories. Some insisted they had staged their disappearance, using the chaos of the falls as cover. They pointed to the growing counterculture of the 1970s, suggesting the couple had abandoned suburban expectations to seek freedom elsewhere. Others believed foul play was more likely, that perhaps they had crossed paths with someone who lured them away from the crowded tourist areas. A robbery gone wrong, a crime of passion, or something darker. The theories multiplied, but evidence remained absent. For the families, the vanishing point was unbearable. Parents replayed their last conversations endlessly, wondering if they had missed hidden hints. Friends questioned whether the couple carried secrets no one had known. The idea of accident felt too cruel, the idea of choice too unthinkable, and the idea of violence too terrifying. Yet without answers, all three possibilities loomed in equal measure. Over time, the vanishing point became more than a moment. It became a metaphor. It represented how quickly certainty can dissolve into uncertainty, how love can transform into legend in the span of a heartbeat. The falls, roaring ceaselessly, seemed almost complicit in the mystery, a natural accomplice that drowns out truth with its thunder. Even now, decades later, standing at the brink of Horseshoe Falls at dusk, one can't help but imagine them there, the young couple caught between awe and danger, their laughter mixing with the mist, unaware that they were stepping into a story that would never find its ending. Their disappearance remains one of Niagara's most enduring enigmas, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary evenings can fracture into the extraordinary without warning. And so, the vanishing point lingers, not only in the files of unsolved cases, but also in the imagination of anyone who gazes into the churning abyss of the falls. Somewhere in that endless rush of water lies the secret of what truly happened that night in 1970, but like the mist itself, it slips away the moment you try to grasp it. Every unsolved mystery casts a shadow, and in Niagara, that shadow stretches far beyond the roar of the water. The disappearance of the honeymoon couple in 1970 was not just an isolated event. It became a mirror reflecting society's fears, curiosities, and need for explanation. When the facts ended, speculation began, and in the absence of truth, theories multiplied like echoes bouncing off the canyon walls. Each theory seemed to carry a life of its own, as though the falls themselves invited people to imagine stories hidden within the mist. The most immediate and perhaps most widely accepted theory was accident. Niagara had claimed countless lives before, both intentional and unintentional. The force of the river was legendary, and anyone who leaned too far over a railing or wandered too close to the slick rocks could easily be swept away. Authorities leaned toward this explanation, presenting it as the simplest and most plausible conclusion. After all, why search for something extraordinary when the ordinary danger of the falls was enough? Yet even among officials, doubt lingered. Accidents leave evidence, splashes, cries, belongings drifting to the surface. In this case, there was nothing. It was as though the falls had orchestrated a vanishing act too perfect to be explained away. But human beings are not satisfied with silence, and soon darker theories emerged. Whispers of crime crept into conversations, fueled by the unease that comes when two lives vanish without a trace. Perhaps the couple had been followed, someone suggested, targeted by a thief who saw them as easy prey in a town crawling with tourists. If so, where were the stolen goods? Why were their wallets, passports, and jewelry left behind in the hotel room? Others proposed that the crime was not about money but passion, that a stranger, or perhaps someone they knew, had intervened in their honeymoon with deadly intent. In the absence of proof, speculation painted shadows darker than any evidence could. Then came the more elaborate theories. In the wake of the 1960s counterculture, some believed the couple had used the falls as a cover to disappear deliberately. They could have slipped away into Canada or deeper into the United States, discarding their old identities to join communes, movements, or secret lives far from the expectations of home. There were rumors of couples doing the same during that era, running from arranged marriages, debts, or even the draft. Could the honeymooners have been part of that hidden wave? For the families left behind, this theory was both hopeful and cruel. Hopeful, because it meant they might still be alive somewhere. Cruel, because it implied abandonment, a choice to sever ties with those who loved them most. As the years passed, folklore grew around the case. Locals began to speak of strange sightings near the riverbanks. Some claimed they saw a young woman in a white dress walking through the mist at night, her figure fading as quickly as it appeared. Others swore they heard whispers carried on the wind, voices too distinct to be the mere echo of water. Guides, eager to thrill tourists, added the story to their repertoire, weaving it into the rich tapestry of Niagara's haunted history. With each retelling, the line between fact and legend blurred further. Yet beneath the layers of superstition lay a deeper truth. The shadow of the falls was not only about what might have happened to the couple, but about what their disappearance represented. Niagara was supposed to symbolize love eternal, a place where beginnings were celebrated and futures seemed limitless. To have that narrative interrupted by tragedy was unsettling. It reminded visitors that beneath the postcard, beauty was a power indifferent to human dreams. The honeymoon capital of the world was also a place where forever could be cut short in an instant. The shadow of the falls also fell upon the investigators themselves. As months turned into years with no progress, doubts grew about whether the truth had been mishandled or even deliberately hidden. Were leads overlooked? Were witnesses ignored? Some believed the authorities preferred the accident theory because it was easier, cleaner, less likely to tarnish the image of Niagara as a safe and romantic destination. If that was true, then the silence was not nature's doing, but society's, an intentional suppression of inconvenient questions. What made the case even more chilling was its timing. The early 1970s were years of cultural upheaval, where trust in institutions was eroding and conspiracies seemed increasingly believable. Against that backdrop, the notion that something sinister lurked behind the disappearance found fertile ground. Was there a darker presence in the shadows of Niagara? Smugglers, predators, or something unspoken that preyed upon the vulnerable? Or was the real culprit something more abstract, the human need to explain the unexplainable? Decades later, the shadow of the falls remains. Tourists take photos by the railing, newlyweds kiss against the mist, and the thunder of water drowns out most thoughts of death. But for those who know the story, a different image lingers. Two young lovers stepping into the night, unaware they were about to cross the invisible threshold between life and legend. Their absence has become as much a part of Niagara as the rushing water itself, an invisible presence in every drop of mist that rises from the gorge. Theories continue, but none have ever pierced the shadow completely. And perhaps that is what makes the mystery endure. For in the shadow of the falls, truth itself seems slippery, always just out of reach, carried away by the relentless current of time. In the years that followed the couple's disappearance, the case refused to sink into silence. It hovered in the air like the mist itself, visible, intangible, and haunting. Every so often, a rumor surfaced, a detail emerged, or a witness stepped forward, insisting they had seen or heard something connected to the vanished newlyweds. These sightings and clues, fragmented and often contradictory, kept the story alive. They also deepened the mystery, for instead of offering clarity, they only added layers of strangeness that blurred the line between reality and folklore. The first of these unsettling accounts came just weeks after the disappearance. A tourist from Ohio reported seeing a young woman in a light-colored dress wandering near the edge of the river after dark. The description matched the bride. She claimed the woman looked confused, almost in a trance, and when approached, she stepped into the fog and vanished from sight. Park rangers searched the area but found no one. The official explanation was misidentification, yet the story spread quickly, igniting whispers of a ghostly presence tied to the missing honeymooners. Later that summer, a fisherman downstream discovered a small silver locket tangled in his net. Inside was a faded photograph of a young couple, though time and water damage made it difficult to confirm their identities. Authorities dismissed the item as unrelated, noting that countless tourists lost jewelry near the falls each year. But for locals, the locket became a talisman, a fragment of evidence too eerie to ignore. Some swore it belonged to the bride, though no definitive link was ever established. More disturbing still were the sounds. Multiple visitors claimed to have heard cries or voices near the rapids during the night, sounds that rose above the constant roar of the water. One Canadian tourist described it as a woman calling for help, carried by the wind and echoing through the gorge. Another insisted he heard laughter, a man and a woman joyous but strangely hollow, as though coming from another time. Officials attributed the reports to the acoustics of the falls, where echoes and water movements often create auditory illusions. Yet those who heard the sounds walked away shaken, convinced they had brushed against something inexplicable. Over the years, physical clues continued to surface in unsettling ways. A shoe was found, lodged between rocks near the whirlpool, its style consistent with those sold in the late 1960s. A torn scrap of fabric, pale blue, appeared near the banks after a heavy storm. Each discovery was logged, photographed, and then quietly dismissed, either too inconclusive or too impossible to verify. And yet, these fragments took on a life of their own in the public imagination, forming a patchwork of possibility that refused to fade. Then came the stranger accounts, the ones authorities avoided mentioning in official reports. A park worker in the 1980s swore he saw a couple standing hand in hand near Horseshoe Falls long after midnight. He assumed they were reckless tourists until he blinked, and they were gone. Others claimed to spot figures in photographs taken at the falls, blurry shapes resembling a man and woman hovering in the mist, always near the same vantage points where the newlyweds were last seen. Skeptics dismissed these tales as tricks of light and imagination, yet they persisted, circulating in late-night conversations and paranormal circles. The unsettling nature of these sightings lies not only in their content, but in their timing. They always seemed to surface when public attention to the case was waning, as though the story itself refused to be forgotten. Newspapers would run anniversary pieces, and suddenly someone would come forward with a new claim. A psychic once visited the site, declaring that the couple had not died in the falls, but had been pulled into another current. A statement vague enough to sound mystical, but specific enough to spark fascination. For the families of the missing, these clues were both torment and solace. Every locket, every whisper, every photograph offered a shred of hope, yet also reopened wounds that time tried to close. Could it be that their children were alive, hidden somewhere? Or were these sightings cruel tricks played by grief and superstition? The lack of certainty ensured that every clue felt like a double-edged sword. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect was the way these sightings transformed the couple's disappearance from a crime or accident into legend. They became part of Niagara's folklore, woven alongside stories of daredevils who survived plunges over the falls and ghosts said to haunt its banks. Tourists now came not only for the beauty of the water, but also for the chance, however faint, of glimpsing the mystery themselves. Niagara, already a place of spectacle, became the stage for a tale that blurred the boundary between the living and the lost. And so, the strange sightings and unsettling clues remain, scattered like puzzle pieces that refuse to fit together. Some are likely coincidences, others products of imagination, and a few perhaps rooted in truth. Yet together, they create an atmosphere of lingering presence, a sense that the newlyweds never truly left Niagara. They are there still, in the locket, in the cries carried by the wind, in the faces glimpsed in the mist, forever tied to the place that was meant to mark the beginning of their lives together. The falls, relentless and eternal, keep rushing. But within its spray, the shadows of that summer in 1970 seem to whisper still. The question is whether those whispers are echoes of the past or signs that the story of the vanished honeymooners is not as finished as we believe. Every unsolved mystery leaves behind a trail of unanswered questions, and for the Niagara honeymoon disappearance of 1970, the investigation itself became as puzzling as the event. What began as a straightforward missing persons case quickly unraveled into a labyrinth of dead ends, contradictions, and unsettling silences. To this day, the files feel incomplete, not just because of what they contain, but because of what seems to be missing. It is as though the investigation itself fell under the same shadow that consumed the Newlyweds. From the very beginning, the investigation was hindered by the sheer brutality of Niagara Falls. The river was both ally and enemy to the search. On one hand, its currents offered a plausible explanation. The couple had been pulled into the water and swept away. On the other, its sheer force destroyed evidence, obscured timelines, and erased any certainty. Divers were deployed, helicopters scanned the gorge, and police combed every inch of the surrounding land, but nothing surfaced. Not a body, not a piece of clothing, not a clue that could be tied definitively to the missing pair. For investigators, this absence was deeply troubling. People don't simply vanish, not without leaving behind something. The official police reports reflect this unease. Notes describe interviews with hotel staff, waiters, and fellow tourists, yet the statements often contradict one another. One witness insisted the couple seemed happy, arm in arm, laughing as they walked toward Goat Island. Another described them as tense, locked in a quiet argument. A third claimed to have seen them enter a wooded path together, though couldn't recall which one. None of the testimonies lined up, and in the chaos of conflicting details, the truth slipped further away. Adding to the confusion were the limitations of the time. In 1970, there were no surveillance cameras to capture the couple's final movements, no cell phones to trace their calls, no forensic technology advanced enough to analyze the smallest traces. Investigators relied on memory, on scraps of physical evidence, and on intuition, all fragile tools in the face of a mystery so profound. But perhaps the most haunting part of the investigation is not what was done, but what was left undone. Files appear incomplete, with sections missing or redacted without explanation. Rumors circulated that certain leads were ignored because they complicated the official narrative of accidental fall. A report from a security guard who swore he saw a suspicious figure following the couple was never followed up. A fisherman who claimed he pulled an unfamiliar article of clothing from the water was told it was unrelated before any tests could be conducted. To the families, these omissions felt deliberate, as if the case was being quietly closed without ever being solved. For the parents of the bride and groom, the investigation became a tormenting cycle of hope and disappointment. Each phone call from authorities promised news, only to deliver the same refrain: "We're still looking." Weeks became months, and then years. Eventually, the official search tapered off, leaving the families to pursue their own inquiries. They hired private investigators, contacted psychics, and traveled to Niagara repeatedly, desperate for answers. Yet no matter how far they searched, they always ended up back at the same place, standing at the edge of the falls, staring into the mist, wondering how a place so loud could keep such a perfect silence. The investigation's incompleteness also fed conspiracy theories. Some believed there was a cover-up, that officials wanted to preserve Niagara's reputation as a safe, romantic destination. A story of two young lovers vanishing into thin air threatened to tarnish the honeymoon capital's image. If the disappearance was the result of foul play, if there was a predator lurking near the falls, then acknowledging it would mean confronting a truth far more frightening than an accident. By labeling the case a likely tragedy and letting it fade, authorities could protect the image of the falls, even if it meant abandoning the truth. To this day, local archives hold only fragments of the original investigation. Journalists who have requested access to the files describe them as thin, containing little more than witness statements and official search reports. The rest, they suspect, has either been lost, destroyed, or deliberately withheld. For those who believe the case hides more than it reveals, this silence is incriminating. But perhaps what makes the investigation feel most unfinished is the lack of closure. Unlike other missing persons cases, there were no bodies to bury, no definitive evidence to grieve. The families were left in a cruel limbo, unable to mourn fully, unable to hope fully, trapped in the endless middle ground of uncertainty. That limbo spread to the community, to investigators, and eventually to everyone who heard the story. The falls themselves seemed to mock the search, always moving, always roaring, yet never giving up what they had taken. In the end, the unfinished investigation became part of the legend. It was not just that the couple disappeared, it was that the very attempt to find them disappeared into the same abyss. Files went missing, evidence slipped through fingers, witnesses contradicted one another, and the truth dissolved in the mist. To this day, people ask not only what happened to the newlyweds, but also why no one could or would uncover it. The case remains open in spirit, if not on paper, and in that unresolved space lies its haunting power. The mystery of the Niagara honeymooners is not just about their final moments, but about the silence that followed, the silence of an investigation that never reached its end. Time has a way of softening memories, dulling the sharp edges of pain and transforming tragedy into legend. But the story of the vanished newlyweds at Niagara Falls has never faded into obscurity. Instead, it has become part of the living folklore of the falls, woven into the very mist that rises each day and night. Their disappearance in the summer of 1970 was not just an isolated event. It became a thread in the broader tapestry of Niagara's history, a tale retold by locals, whispered by guides, and carried in the imagination of visitors who still arrive in search of love, awe, and sometimes unease. For decades, Niagara Falls has been celebrated as the honeymoon capital of the world. Its cascading waters were seen as a metaphor for eternal devotion, powerful, unstoppable, unending. Newlyweds would stand arm in arm before the roaring spectacle, convinced that their vows were as indestructible as the river itself. Yet in the shadow of that romance, the story of the missing couple lingers like an omen. The place that symbolized love eternal became the site of love's greatest mystery. Their disappearance shattered the illusion that Niagara was only about beauty and promise. It revealed that danger, tragedy, and secrecy flowed beneath the surface. The legacy of the case endures not only in folklore, but also in the culture of the falls. Tour guides mention the story to wide-eyed tourists, lowering their voices as though sharing a secret carried only through the mist. Locals recall it with a mixture of sorrow and superstition, warning that the river takes as much as it gives. And for those who stand by the railings at dusk, when the sky turns crimson and the thunder of water swallows every other sound, the legend becomes tangible. Many say they feel a presence, an uncanny reminder that the falls are not just a place of beginnings, but of endings that defy explanation. The story has also seeped into broader popular culture. Journalists revisited it on anniversaries, framing it as one of the great unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Paranormal investigators included it in documentaries, linking the couple's disappearance to ghostly sightings around the falls. Writers and filmmakers found inspiration in the case, weaving fictional tales of lovers lost to nature's fury or to darker human forces lurking in the mist. In this way, the couple's fate transcended their own story, becoming a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that even in modern times some mysteries remain unsolvable. For the families, however, the legacy was more personal, more painful. The parents lived with decades of uncertainty, never able to bury their children, never able to say goodbye. Every anniversary was both a memorial and a wound, reopening questions that time could not answer. Their grief became part of the story's legacy too, a testament to how disappearance is not just about the lost, but about those left behind in a silence that never ends. What makes the Niagara mystery endure is its perfect balance of fact and enigma. There were real people, real places, real evidence or lack of it that grounds the story in reality. But every detail that should lead to clarity only leads to more questions. Were they victims of an accident, swept away by the merciless current? Did someone lure them into danger? Or did they slip away intentionally, leaving behind their past lives for reasons we may never understand? The absence of definitive answers has allowed the story to remain alive, reshaped by each new generation that encounters it. Today, the falls continue to roar with the same relentless power they held in 1970. Millions of visitors arrive each year, taking photographs, celebrating honeymoons, marveling at nature's spectacle. Yet somewhere in the back of many minds, the legend stirs. Two young lovers who came here seeking forever and instead became part of a mystery without end. Some say their spirits linger not as restless ghosts, but as a reminder that love and loss are often inseparable. The mist itself feels heavier when you know their story, as if it carries echoes of the unanswered questions that have drifted across the decades. The legacy of the missing honeymooners is not only about death or disappearance. It is about how stories survive, how they evolve, and how they become inseparable from the places where they unfold. Niagara Falls is no longer just water and stone. It is a stage where history, myth, and mystery converge. And at the heart of that myth, the couple's disappearance remains the most haunting chapter. Perhaps that is why, even after more than 50 years, their story continues to flow. Like the river, it refuses to stop, carrying with it fragments of fear, fascination, and sorrow. It reminds us that not everything can be explained, that love and mystery often occupy the same space, and that some stories are destined never to find their conclusion. The honeymoon that never ended has become the legend that never fades, ensuring that the couple lives on, not in answers, but in questions that will echo for as long as Niagara Falls. If you were captivated by this haunting story of Niagara Falls, make sure to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. We dive into mysteries like this every week. Share your theories in the comments. Do you think it was an accident, foul play, or something stranger? Your ideas might be featured in our next video. Don't miss out. Join our community of curious minds and uncover the secrets that history tried to hide.